You're listening to The Rule of Law, the educational podcast sponsored by Allrise, where we focus on the intersection of law, technology, and storytelling. And now, here's your host, Lauren Round.
Welcome to Rule of Law. In today's episode, we sit down with Richard Tromans, founder of The Artificial Lawyer. We discuss what's broken with the big law business model, innovation manifestos, and how AI is reshaping not just the legal industry, but the law itself. All right. Richard, welcome to the podcast. Where are you recording from?
I'm in London.
London, okay. Well, you are our second UK guest, so we're happy to have you guys here. Our team just traveled to the UK. I was in UK and our CMO was in UK a couple of months ago. So your visitor office is doing a good job, whatever they're doing over there.
It's an important market. It's a springboard to Europe, rest of the world. So yeah, there's a lot of interest in the UK from US companies, and likewise, most people in the UK are interested in the US.
Yes, for sure. Well, welcome. We have a lot of questions to get to about your thoughts and opinions on the modern law firm, how it's working, not working, AI. But before we get to all that, if you wouldn't mind just starting by telling us a little bit about you and how you came to The Artificial Lawyer.
Yeah, I'll give you the condensed version. So I've been working in the legal sector for about 25 years. Oh my God, that long. But yeah, started off as a journalist. I was the international editor of a magazine called Legal Week, which was bought by American Lawyer. I've worked in other jobs in the media, and then I started working as a management consultant. First of all, within Thomson Reuters, doing strategy consulting to the legal sector, and then I worked for an M&A boutique in the City of London, working on big transactions. But one of my key jobs was research, as well as consulting or supporting the other consultants. And I used to write effectively what were very, very chunky reports every couple of months on where things were going. And I was asked to do a report about the far future, just let yourself go, just like, where are we all going? And that was about late 2014, early 2015. And I did a chapter about AI and the law. And I'd started to read a few little bits about AI and the law at that point. And I really just thought, yeah, this is really, really fascinating. And then in 2016, by which point I'd set up my own business, my own consulting business, I was getting more and more interested in AI. At this point, I was still a management consultant who went into law firms and tried to help them increase their profitability or help them to do a merger, this kind of stuff, very business orientated. And technology never came into the subject at all. Not at all. It was a tiny item, really, at the very bottom. If we had 20 subjects to talk about, technology was probably at the very bottom. And it was probably a 3-minute conversation. And then it was straight back onto, so who are we going to merge with? Which was way more important to them. And the reason why they were merging were basically things around their geography, their fame, the talents, the profitability of that particular practice, and so forth. It was not because, hey, they're really into AI or they're great at legal tech, right? Those things just were not part of the conversation in 2015, 2016. Anyway, in that context, I was getting more and more interested about AI, and I went to see an AI company in London. And it just blew me away. Even back in 2016, early 2016, I just thought, I don't know where this is going, but if it's going where I think it's going, this is going to transform the legal sector. And I thought, well, it'd be fun to write about this. So I started a blog called Artificial Lawyer. And Artificial Lawyer grew and grew and grew. And it's now a globally read website, read by thousands of people all around the world. We do events, we do webinars, we do all kinds of things. And this is how I got to meet you.
And what is the best way for our listeners to follow you or learn more about your work?
Yeah, it's very simple. So the easiest way is to go to artificial lawyer. Just go to Google, type in artificial lawyer, and you will get through to the website. It's got news, it's got views, analysis, videos, and all kinds of useful information for those interested, particularly in the AI side of legal tech. We also do events called the Legal Innovators events. The next event is Legal Innovators California, which is in June, San Francisco, June 11th and 12th. It's 2 days. Day one is law firms. Day two is about in-house. If you'd like to find more information or get a ticket, just go to Google, type in Legal Innovators California.
I've seen a topic of discussion come up a couple of times on whether firms are really serious about AI or not, because like you said, we're all getting more comfortable with it. But then there are some firms that are kind of talking about AI use sort of for PR possibly. And then other firms are actually taking it really seriously, but not being transparent. I mean, what have you kind of seen in firms doing AI the right way or the wrong way?
Well, I think we're getting the whole spectrum, and even within firms, there'll be little islands of innovation and ambition, and large swathes of a lack of interest or even outright hostility. From again, from the smallest firms to the largest, to the largest in-house legal teams. I think a lot of it has to do with management. I mean, I think if you've got a firm, whether it's small or large, and the management is really behind it and doesn't just see this as a marketing ploy, which definitely happened with that first wave of AI, but this is for real, then yeah, there are some interesting things going on. I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, I mean, if you kind of think of it in terms of like 3 or 4 steps, so you might say step one has been to build a kind of connection to ChatGPT, right? So a lot of people have been building little sort of chatbot sandboxes internally, which are kind of like a safe space where the lawyers can jump on and access an LLM and just ask general questions. They're kind of generally discouraged from putting work product into that. Then you get to the next stage, where this is usually with firms that have got innovation teams or smaller law firms where the management is really behind it. And they're starting to bring in, you might say, like AI platforms or legal tech, generative AI platforms, which might have a host of different tools. So, around document review, document drafting, document comparison. It may go into legal research. It may not. You may carry on using your own existing legal research tools. And some of the legal research tools are now also offering a whole host of other applications around drafting and so forth, transactional tools. The key question, really, it always boils down to the same thing. Are you using these tools to change the way that you produce your actual billable work product? Or are you just using them around the edges? Are you using them on what you might call pre-bill work? So a client rings you up and says, hey, I need to understand this particular new piece of legislation. Could you help? You, as the lawyer, think, okay, this is probably going to lead to some work, but this doesn't sound like a job yet. You use AI to summarize the legislation, you do some brainstorming with it, and then you email back the client. None of this is billable, perhaps. The client goes, oh, okay, it's interesting, but you should say that because I've actually got a good piece of work for you. And then off you go. And that piece of work is done in exactly the same way that it was done 30 years ago, right? So the AI has kind of helped a bit, but has it changed the game? No. Has it really made any real impact? No, not at all, really. Has it changed the business model? No. Does the client see any real net difference? No. So in a funny way, you could actually have a bunch of lawyers using a lot of AI tools, but they're using them in a way that effectively neuters their ability to actually change the game in any meaningful way. Then you get the real thing, which is where people say, well, hold on a minute. So we've got to do, for this project, we need to review, 10,000 documents. There's no way that I'm going to bill the client to read those 10,000 documents. Normally, we're going to give it a first pass with AI, and then we're going to dig into those documents, and then we'll throw the associates at it. And then when it comes to, maybe this project will also need the drafting of multiple, contracts, maybe employment contracts. Maybe we've got to knock out a whole bunch of them. Again, we're not going to sort of hand type the whole lot. We're going to use AI to help us draft them with modifications made for each employee as and when needed, or whatever. But the key point is that if you're going to do that, that is going to change the amount of time that a job takes, right? It's implicit. If reading 10,000 documents normally by hand, hand and eye, it's going to take you weeks, months. If you're using AI, you could probably zip through that whole 10,000 in about 10 minutes, right? Obviously, you've then got to examine the output, and that may take a couple of weeks, but we maybe shrink a couple of months down to a couple of weeks in this due diligence project. The law firm sells time. The client measures value by time. If something took a long time, obviously you did a good job. Now all of that goes completely out of a window, at least for certain types of work. So for me, the measure of whether a law firm is using AI in a truly impactful way generally kind of orbits a bigger question, which is, are you moving away from a time-based billing system? For the in-house lawyers, they also have to, play the game. If the in-house lawyers refuse to acknowledge that you can measure value with anything else other than time, well, it's not really the law firm's fault. I mean, if the law firms are offering to do something on a fixed fee and the GC is like, well, I don't like fixed fees, I prefer the billable hour, well, not a lot you can do. But then internally, for the in-house team, again, you've got the same issue. Although it's slightly different, because of course the in-house legal team doesn't bill by the hour. It's their employees. They might be very powerful, high-value employees, but they're employees at the end of the day. They don't get paid extra for doing an hour extra work, right? For in-house teams, I simply cannot understand why anyone wouldn't be using every AI tool available to them, as long as it was sufficiently accurate. And secure, because it's just a win-win, right? And many of them are. I mean, I saw a survey this morning saying that about 85% of in-house lawyers are now comfortable with AI-driven contract review, which is fantastic. So I don't know if that answers your question, but really it all boils down to truly effective change. On the law firm sell side, does it affect the business model? Does it affect the hourly billing? On the buy side, are the in-house lawyers buying services that are not time-based? Because if they're still buying time, then really whatever AI input is in there is going to be minimal. Some AI input might help to surface additional risks, perhaps gain additional insights, but I think that's fairly negligible really on balance. And then also, how are they using the AI internally? Because, being an in-house lawyer, you don't get any special points, from anyone really. You've got to do the job. Your job is to remove risk, to advise the board, to deal with the thousands of contracts going through the in-house legal team and so forth. You've just got to get the job done. And so if you're not using AI tools meaningfully, not really integrating them into your workflows or not making an effort, then nothing's happening. So I'd say it's a complete spectrum. So we've got from the deniers to the deliberately dragging their feet, to the dragging their feet but pretending not to be dragging their feet, to the just putting out marketing, PR stuff but actually not doing anything, to only using these tools where it doesn't affect billable work, all the way through to people actually redesigning some of their workflows and actually having a real impact. So it's a complete spectrum.
I do want to dwell on that point a bit that you made about how we haven't necessarily seen AI make much of a difference yet for most firms outside of the margins. And I mean, you could make that argument sort of with legal tech in general, that as far as we come technologically, just outside of AI, the law firm model hasn't really changed that much. And I mean, depending on what studies or surveys you look at, I think still over 80+% of law firms say that they still use time bill based on the hour, time-based services. And I think that speaks to sort of deeply ingrained business model and attitude about how the way legal services should be billed. And I mean, you're in a great position to speak about this because you've been covering legal tech for many iterations of the different technological advances that we've seen over the past 20 years. So, I mean, do you see the model really changing? Like, is this the time that firms are going to be forced into change, or do you think in 5 years we're still going to have the vast majority of firms on time-based billing?
Well, I'd like to say that it was going to happen quickly, but I've been working in this sector for so long now that I know that the reality is, unless you can provide a much, much more compelling model, then the vast majority of lawyers who are in the larger law firms, the smaller law firms we come to in a minute, they have a different set of issues, but the larger law firms, they simply need convincing that moving away from time, embracing technology is in their interest. And they just don't buy it yet, really. And the truth is, I mean, I'd like to say they do, they don't, really. It could take a long time. I mean, my personal guess is that we're going to have total systemic change, kind of domino toppling effect, where it starts to become uncomfortable for law firms if they haven't changed. Probably it could be a decade or more. But I don't feel bad about that, because if you think about it, if you think of all the different industries in the world, right, from chiropodists to dentists to PR executives to etc., right, to truck drivers, right, changing fundamentally the way that lawyers work with technology is probably the single hardest job on the planet, right? I mean, being the head of innovation at a big law firm is like trying to crack this incredibly complex mathematical formula that's been sitting there for centuries and no one's actually managed to crack it, right? I mean, if we can crack the legal world, then pretty much everything else can change, right? Because the legal market is the most linguistically complex area. It's the one most fraught with risk in relation to text. It's the most subtle one with the highest monetary value related to interpretation and meaning, and also getting things accurate. Obviously it's important if you're writing a novel to get things accurate, and it's all based on text, but you tend not to go to novelists to save the interests of a multi-billion-dollar company, whereas you might go to a law firm for that. So so you might say, wow, so it might take years and years for really complete systemic change to take effect. And the answer is yes. Yeah, I think so. But if you have your eyes on the prize, if you say to yourself, well, if we can actually fundamentally change the way that the legal profession works, then nothing else will be that hard, and pretty much every other white collar job is up for change. In fact, probably will have changed by that point. It's an extraordinary goal, and I think we've just got to keep nibbling away at it. And my personal view is I think it's probably a two-track thing. I mean, I tend to focus on both tracks simultaneously, which is all this kind of, you might say, sort of tactical moves. So X legal tech company gets a load of funding, it builds some great products, a bunch of law firms bring it in, start to use it around the fringes. And then I also focus on the bigger sort of macro, sort of more systemic issues, the strategic issues, which is, as we discussed, can you move away from time? Can you change your business model? And so forth. And I think this kind of two-pronged approach eventually, along with improvements in technology, particularly around accuracy, will eventually change the foundations of the system. And I mean, also, let's think about it, right? I mean, the legal industry as we know it today kind of came into existence in the 70s and 80s. And then, of course, you can trace it all the way back hundreds, thousands of years. But the modern big law world, with the billable hour, the huge pyramid with lots and lots of leverage, really only came into existence in the 1980s, in truth. So it's only really existed for, say, 50, 60 years. And I think it will transform. It will transform, I think, in the next 10 years. And then once that's transformed, there's no going back. It's kind of an amazing thing to think that there are law students today, if anyone is listening, hi, law students, A law student today will graduate, hopefully get a job at a law firm, and probably just around the time they're getting into the partnership, if that's what they wish, or if they've gone in-house by the time they maybe get into the sort of deputy general counsel role, that the entire market will have changed completely and systematically. And I think that's an incredible thought.
It is. And yeah, something that you said, you mentioned the role of head of innovation, which, speaking of law school, I did not recall seeing job postings for head of law firm innovation when I was graduating law school. So I think that's a relatively new concept. But speaking of that role, I've started to see, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, these innovation manifestos. I think you've written about a couple of them, mostly from big law firms. But I see these press releases that we've posted our latest innovation manifesto. It lays out the firm's AI principles, responsible approach to innovation, etc. Any sort of general thoughts on these? Like maybe give us the positive and the negative. Is there value in publishing these? And then if you had to take a more cynical take, what would that take be?
Yeah. Well, I mean, on face value, I think if they're real, then it's a fantastic move. It's fantastic in several ways. One, of course, is the obvious marketing benefits. So, you say to your clients, yes, we're actually serious about AI. We're not just, this isn't just marketing, it's for real, which of course is the best marketing as well. Secondly, I think it gives everyone involved in the firm, the lawyers, the innovation team, everybody, a North Star to aim towards. These are our goals. This is what we believe. This is what we want to believe. We're trying to make it real. And I think thirdly as well, it kind of sends a message to the market, both to the legal tech companies who might want to work with that law firm, because they'll see that manifesto and they'll say, wow, we should be working with these people. These are exactly the kind of clients we want. And it sends a message to all the other law firms, which is, well, we're your peers, right? We're always across you on the deals. If there's a pitch, we're in the room. It's saying, well, look, we're serious about this stuff. Why aren't you? So it has a very, very positive effect. Cynical side, and not necessarily cynical, but just pragmatic, which is that, of course, some law firms will just talk the talk, but not walk the walk. And that's inevitable. Some law firms will say, yeah, we're absolutely serious about this and this and this. We've invested in A, B, C, D, and then once you drill down, you realize that A, B, C, and D are not particularly large projects, but actually most of the lawyers at the firm have never even heard of those projects, let alone the clients. And they don't actually wield any of the AI tools in any meaningful way that actually changes their business model, actually creates any extra value for the clients and so forth. And in the end, it's just fluff, right? Both of those things can be true at the same time, right? Not at the same firm, obviously, but you will have one firm at one end of the street who's absolutely serious. They've got management buy-in. And I think this is a really key point, which is an innovation team at a law firm can only achieve so much on its own. Even if there are other partners, or if there are partners and junior associates and so forth who are very supportive and want to get involved, if you do not have the management committee, right? If you do not have the executive committee, the ExCom, if you do not have a managing partner, senior partner, and so forth, if they are not really honestly behind it, they're not just pretending like a politician because they have to, but genuinely mean it. Unless you have that, it's very, very, very difficult to move things forward. I've met innovation teams who have fantastic people, really creative. Just like knocking out really brilliant internal projects, bringing in really, really, cutting edge legal tech tools. And they have innovation partners and innovation associates who are practicing lawyers, but who are really focused on innovation and so forth. But the management committee, the truth is, they're not really into it. One or two of them might be, but the truth is, if they could just forget about this and just go back to usual, they would. And I think it's like with any business, isn't it? If it was a car company, an airline, a computer manufacturer, you name it, doesn't matter really. If the management team isn't really on board, then you can publish as many manifestos as you want, and it makes no difference.
And I mean, I don't really blame management, to be honest, because if you are a partner and you've slaved away for 2 decades doing what you're doing, and then all of a sudden an innovation team comes in and asks you to change everything about what you've been doing for the last couple of decades, I absolutely understand that resistance. But I think it's going to get, as you alluded to earlier, more difficult as we go forward and more firms do get on board, and from a retention standpoint, because I imagine that must be incredibly difficult for the junior associates or junior partners who are on board but are kind of being blocked by senior partners. Firms might even be able to use this as sort of a recruitment and retention tool.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. Although, let's face it, right? Big law is predicated on the idea that it will lose. This is this is like, it's the big elephant that no one wants to talk about. Big law is predicated on the idea that it will lose probably 80% of its talent, right? Whoever. I mean, if X big law firm hires 100 people, it's expecting 80 of them to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Very, very few businesses hire 100 people who all have, half a $1,000,000 educations, right? Very high IQs, great memories, incredible work ethics, etc., and then expect at least 80% of them to leave. I mean, that's pretty mad, isn't it? I mean, if I hired 100 people, I'd expect some of them to leave. I wouldn't want any of them to leave, but maybe one or two are a bit, bad choices. But I would expect I don't know, 4 or 5% natural attrition, and then maybe 3 or 4% who I'd like to leave. But to lose 80%, which is basically what it is, if not more, that's pretty mad, isn't it? I mean, no one talks about this. No one talks about this at all. So the people who actually do get to the top of the tree and then get into management, they're a very, very special group of people. And they're not just good at making money through providing legal advice. They're the keepers of the fire, the sacred fire. They keep the firm going. They keep the spirit and the culture of the firm. And so, yeah, as you said quite rightly, an innovation person who perhaps is not an equity partner walks in and says, "Oh, you've got to do this, you've got to do that," and they're just like, "Really? Yeah, make me." You have no leverage here. I pay your salary, right? I think fundamentally, big law particularly, and it probably goes for everybody really, and it's probably a universal truth, that if X will make you more money, or not doing X will make you a lot less money, then X is going to happen. Mm-hmm. Everything else outside of the equation is marginal.
Let's pause for a moment to hear a word from our sponsor, All Rise.
Deploying new software technology can disrupt familiar workflows and processes, and it often comes with a steep learning curve for the employees in your law firm. We get it, but it doesn't have to be that way. All Rise is a comprehensive law practice management system deeply integrated with the Microsoft tools and technology you're already familiar with, so no steep learning curve is required. And because All Rise is a modular software platform, you can deploy only the specific capabilities you need when you need them. Your choice. If you want to streamline internal operations, boost staff productivity, and deliver superior client service, then take a close look at the AI-powered All Rise platform. It's time to experience software innovation that enables practice excellence. Learn more at allrise.ai.
I do want to get to a specific question on that note about not just how AI is changing kind of the role of lawyers, but actually how it might change legal concepts or how we think about certain legal instruments, certainly, and taking the example of contracts, because one of the reasons that we were so happy to have you on is because you're the few that are speaking about how AI can actually go further than changing just the law firm model. So for a contracts example, right? Like we've seen a lot of data and promising feedback about how accurate AI tools can be in drafting contracts, definitely first draft and second draft, and saving lawyers a ton of time. But you are one of the few talking about how, well, actually, that's great. But if we were to reinvent contracts today, we wouldn't invent them as they are today. Every single contract is different. It doesn't really make any sense that every contract is different, even for very, very similar circumstances or business dealings. So talk a little bit about how AI might actually reinvent the idea of a contract, or something broader. It doesn't have to be the contracts example, but how we're going further than kind of just the role of the lawyer.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, well, putting AI to one side, I mean, there's a lot to be said for standardization. I mean, and it's a question of degree, isn't it? I mean, all contracts of any type, if there are multiple versions of it around the world, there's a degree of similarity, right? It may even be a very complex derivatives contract for sugar, right? Which is pretty, esoteric. But if there's a couple of hundred of those, I bet you there's some standards between them. There's some similarities which are standard. It's about, I think, striking a balance there, because lawyers are effectively the medium between multiple parties, and they have their own interests, and so anything that's completely standard is okay to begin with, but you do need to allow modification. So you got that point, that's got nothing to do with technology. That's just literally, that's about rethinking about contracts. But you do, obviously, I think you've got to have variability and so forth. But I think once we get into the technological side, then we can get into some really interesting things. So, for example, around negotiation, for example, how many points in a particular contract actually need to be negotiated, and how far do they need to be negotiated? There's a very interesting paper that I read recently, which was saying that most small to medium-sized businesses, way over half of their contracts, they don't even negotiate. They just go, look, we could negotiate it, but basically most of the key terms look fine to me. We're not going to get dragged into the weeds here. Now, that's not a standardization issue. That's just simply, we don't want to negotiate, because to negotiate is going to incur legal costs, and frankly, we can't be bothered. This is not a bet the company contract. We're not doing an M&A deal here. So I think you get into a very, very interesting point there, which is you've got this kind of middle distance between the incredibly complicated work, which of course you're going to be doing almost completely by hand. This stuff which you don't even look at, which is like the standard NDA, for example, which you don't even modify, to then up a level to the contracts, which you probably could modify, but you choose not to then going up another level, which is contracts where you kind of think, well, it probably would be worth me getting into this contract, reviewing it, negotiating it, and so forth, but I don't have the time or the money to do it. But the AI tools then help you to do that. And it's going to be interesting to see how this pattern of trying to be more efficient, throwing technology at it, growing standardization, at least the basic types of contracts, fundamentally changes how contracts work. In terms of the nitty-gritty of contracts, I don't think that's going to change too much, at least in the near term. I think we're going to remain language-based. I don't believe that code is law. I don't believe in that stuff. Code is not sophisticated enough. Law is language. Language is imprecise. Language is all about interpretation. That's why lawyers exist. But that's also how humans communicate. So we can't really get around that. Humans are not robots. We don't go beep, 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 code to each other. We express, I would like you to not talk about this project for 2 years. The other side goes, well, what do you mean? Can you define talking about? Does that mean that I can write about it? So begins the negotiation. So begins the beginning of that contract. I don't think that's ever going to go away. I think the question is how many resources do we put into this? Where do we draw the line? So going back to that key point, do we say, no, it's not worth it? Here's done contract, just sign it. To doing everything by hand, to that middle distance where we're like, well, you know what? Let's throw some AI at this. And I don't think we know yet how that's going to pan out. It's interesting to see what's happening in the small law sector, because they do deal with a lot of contracts that are probably, you might say, fairly routine, fairly standard. And, we're seeing things where you can go to a legal tech company, like a public website, and you can ask questions about that contract and get some fairly good answers back. But then you can escalate it up to a lawyer, but then perhaps the lawyer is also using AI tools, so they can zip through that contract negotiation for you much faster, much more cheaply. But I think that, again, it's funny because it all comes back to the time point again, you see, because back in the old days, you'd ring up a lawyer and say, hey, can you review my contract? And they would spend some time, and then they would ring up the other party, and back and forth and rack up loads of costs. And of course, that's why, more than 50% of small businesses don't use lawyers, because they can't afford to. Because the last time they spoke to a lawyer, they were given an idea of how much it would cost, and they just went, no way, I'm not doing this. So it's not so much, I think, that contracts are going to be reinvented, but we might see a reinvention of the way we think about them.
So that's a good point. And I think what also is sort of missed in these conversations is the law, as you said, is human and is subjective, and AI doesn't have to take that away. I think it can actually bring that to more people, because as you said, a small business or an individual is going to a lawyer because they're an expert and it's emotional. They want to have someone talk them through this and make them feel better. And AI, I don't really see a world where AI is going to be able to do that for people. So maybe if we get lawyers away from doing things like wasting time on the phone, going back and forth negotiating, and getting them focused on sort of high value work, I think that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, no, totally. But again, it always comes down to money, because if you're working at a small firm, you might say, well, the more of these jobs that I get, if I do it on a fixed fee, the more money I make, right? Because I can do 30 of these in a day. The lawyer at a big firm may be like, well, I don't actually want to take on 30 jobs in a day, because that's just because these are very big clients, but what I would actually like to do is you agree to pay an absolute fortune for the 20 minutes that I am going to spend talking to you. The rest of it will just be, the rest of the cost, which is all going to be done by AI, will just be tucked under that cost. Effectively, I'm giving you, the bulk of the actual legwork for free, but the value added bit, which is me, who's got loads and loads of experience, talking to you, guiding you through it, which might only be a 20-minute phone call, well, I'm going to charge you $20,000 for that. And if you're a Fortune 500 company, you might say, well, that's nothing. That's fantastic. Deal. And I think this is the point, is that AI, once AI effectively punctures the idea that time is value and value is time, then we move into a whole different world. And if you think about it, the vast majority of the economy operates like that, right? Even something that's fairly similar, like management consulting, a lot of management consultants do not charge by the hour, right? There's a lot of legwork that, interviews hundreds of people, you build this beautiful report. But what the client is really paying for is the top 5 pages written by the most senior consultant, who says, I have read all of this data and this is what I think. And that is what the client is paying for. The client is not paying for the junior associates or junior consultants who've been running around interviewing 200 people and making hundreds upon hundreds of PowerPoint slides, right? That's the filler, that's the filler in the sandwich. What you really want is that meat. Everything else is just garnish. And I think the irony is that law firms already think like this. I was talking to one global law firm a while ago, and I said, what I don't understand is that you yourself say that the junior associates are not bringing a lot of value to the job because they're just doing process work, right? Routine work. And they replied, yes, that's absolutely right. But the real value is from the senior partners, who bring tremendous value with their insights, their knowledge, etc., their proprietary, contracts, and so forth. It's real value. Plus that, they're taking the personal responsibility for handling $1 billion deal. That's quite a lot. That's where the value is. And I said, okay, I agree with you. In which case, why don't you just charge them a fixed fee? Why don't you just say that the price of this job is $2 million, and effectively you get all the associate work for free? That $2 million is basically, for me and my fellow partner, spending a few hours with you, explaining to you that this is the best way to do what you're going to do, and here are the documents you need to do them, to do it that way. But they're kind of scared to do that. And I think part of the reason why they're scared to do that is because they're worried that if they said to the client, here's $2 million, a $2 million bill for a bunch of contracts and some conversations with me and my friend Fred, without a huge bill of billable hours, itemizing everything in 6-minute increments, that they wouldn't accept it. And of course, the double irony is that who taught the clients to behave like that? Well, the law firms did, right? Because 99%, at least in the US, 99% of in-house lawyers trained inside law firms, where they were taught how to think about time and money and value, and then they go in-house, and then they start probably using the same law firm that they were trained in. And guess what? They've had it rammed into the back of their brain that time equals value. And of course, they've probably joined the in-house legal team of the client when they were a junior associate or mid-level associate. So yeah, that's all they've ever known. So it's kind of ironic, really, that one of the reasons why law firms can't move past this kind of sticking point is because they actually created the problem.
We had a conversation a couple weeks back about this problem exactly. And yeah, one of the problems is I think both sides were trained in a certain way to time is value. But also firms are some of them are just operating from a place of fear, right? They're afraid to lose a client. They're afraid to ask a client for more. They're afraid that they're going to settle on the wrong price. So there's a lot of fear around kind of changing this model too, for good reason. But yeah, these are definitely tough problems to solve. I do want to end on try to end on a positive note, because we've talked a lot about sort of the pitfalls of what might be going wrong in big law and how far we might have to go and a lot of the challenges. But I do want to try to end on sort of a lighter note. Is there anything that you're super excited about? Anything that you've seen recently, trends or just general hopes that you're looking forward to as you've been following this industry for the last 20 years?
I think it just goes back to the key point, which is that the fundamental barriers to systemic change in the legal market were apparent to, I think, everybody a long time ago. I mean, the ideas that I developed back in 2015, 2016, they haven't changed at all. Maybe modified a little bit. The good news is that the train has left the station, right? I mean, we are closer, just about, to the you might say the end point of this particular cycle than we are the beginning. We are on the way now, and I think that's tremendously exciting. And I think one of the problems with technology, the technology culture around it, is that people expect sort of instant gratification, instant change, but you've got to be long term. It's like educating a child, right? I mean, you don't, if you've got like a 5-year-old child, you don't suddenly go, right, well, next year you'll go to Harvard, all right? That they're not going to go to Harvard next year, right? It's going to take a long time. And you've got to have that kind of mindset. You're building towards something. You've got to have this end goal, and we are building in the right direction. So I think that's very positive.
Very, very well said, and a perfect note to end on.
Thank you, Richard, for joining us, and best of luck at your upcoming conference. Reminder, you can find out more about the Legal Innovators Conference by visiting artificiallawyer.com.
Thanks for listening, and join us again for another Rule of Law podcast from All Rise.